over the last few weeks, the news has been terrible, hasn't it? I just can't sort of bear to watch it sometimes because it's just been so bad. I mean, we had the plane crash in the Ukraine, and it's just unthinkable what's happened there. But there's more. There's the Ebola virus in West Africa. You can't hear me. Is that better? The Ebola virus in West Africa. And that's just killing so many people. And it's just something that they haven't got a cure for. And then there's the situation in Gaza, with Israel and Gaza and the Palestinians. And then there's bombing of Gaza and so many innocent lives being taken. And then more recently, everything that's going on in Iraq. It just feels unbearable to watch, doesn't it? You know, and the news bulletin don't show half of things that are going on at all. It's just incredible. And some Christians are saying, you know, we're in end times. Possibly we are. But Jesus does say, nobody knows the hour. But the news certainly does describe things which are mentioned in the Bible, doesn't it? In Matthew 24. Jesus talks about things like earthquakes and famines and persecution. And all of those things are happening right now in the world. And it just feels like it doesn't feel safe to be a Christian anymore. Because even in this country, there's persecution going on. And we look at the news, and sometimes it's very difficult to get a handle of actually what's going on and how to pray for these situations. I just wanted to spend a few moments just trying to unpick what's going on. Now, this is Israel, and this is Gaza. Now, for us, we understand what Israel's claims are to the land, because we read our Old Testament, don't we? Israel's has been promised this land ever since that reading that we had in Joseph and before, that with land that's promised to Abraham, the promised land. And for many years, the Israelis didn't live there. They lived everywhere, but actually in Israel, because Israel, the country, didn't exist. And they were all scattered through Europe and the rest of the world. And then all of those terrible things happened in the Second World War. And the United Kingdom was actually in control of Palestine at the time. And they decided to create a state called Israel. And there were lots of battles that have gone on since, but in 1947, the state of Israel was created. And it was decided to partition the land so that the Palestinians or the Arabs would actually sort of live in certain areas, and the Israelis or the Jews would live in other areas. But you can imagine if you were living in Bentley, for example, and somebody came over and said, well, my family were promised this land and you've all got to get out of it. You've got to leave your homes. How that would make you feel. And that's how the Palestinians feel. They've been taken out of their land. They've lived there for thousands of years. And they've been pushed into some areas. Now, I've got this map to show you. And if you can see here, this is Gaza. This is the Gaza Strip. And that's where the Palestinians live. But there's also another area called the West Bank. And this is another area which was given to Palestine. But the Israelis have been encroaching on Palestine. And they've actually taken over huge areas of it. And if you look at the map in detail, there's actually sort of areas which are under Israeli control within Palestine. There's also a blockade around Gaza, which means that the people of Gaza are not free to come and go as they please. They have to go through Israeli-controlled checkpoints. So the people of Gaza have built tunnels. They've sent in suicide bombers into Israel because they want their freedom. It's hard to understand, isn't it? But it isn't really. These people want their land back, but Israel want control of their land because that's the land that's promised to them. There's no easy solutions to it. But what we do have is we have a situation where Israel feels threatened by Gaza and so is sending out bombs and is bombing the Gaza Strip. Now, I don't know about you, but if you were told to leave an area just by a phone call, you've got to leave your home because we're sending a bomb. You've only got a matter of hours before we're going to bomb your home. That's what's happening to people. I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. I'm just trying to describe what's going on there. And there's no easy solutions. There's ceasefires which are broken. And these wars have been going on for years. It's probably since the beginning of the 20th century. Is there an easy solution? There isn't. But hopefully we can bring peace to that area. Or maybe there isn't. I don't know. And the situation in Iraq has become even more extreme. There's a group of extreme Muslims. They were calling themselves ISIS. They now call themselves Islamic State. And they claim that the Quran, which is their version of the Bible, tells them to kill unbelievers. And it describes in detail what you do. Now, I've looked at some translations of the Quran, and yes, there are some translations of the Quran which you could read like that. But most peace-loving Muslims don't read it like that. But these very extreme, radical Muslims are taking that word to the letter. They've taken control of areas of Iraq which were previously areas where other people of other religions lived. The Yazidis, Christians and Jews have been forced to leave their homes. The Christians have been given the choice to convert to Islam, to leave, or to die. I don't know about you, but I just don't know how I would respond if I was given that choice. To leave and to know that you've got nowhere to go to. We've seen the pictures of people that have just fled to the mountains because there's nowhere for them to go to. Who are dying of thirst in the mountains because they've been forced to leave their homes. What we haven't seen are pictures of Christians actually being murdered because it's too violent. And it's terrible. The Christians have had their homes marked with a letter. It's an N. Can you see that funny symbol, which looks like a U with a top on it? That's actually an Arabic letter, and it's N. Now you might think, well, what's N got to do with anything? But it means Nazarene. And the people who are Christians are having their homes marked with those letters. They're being marked out. To remind you of anything? It's a bit like what was happening to the Jews in the Second World War, isn't it? They were being marked with the Star of David. Well, this is what's happening now in Iraq. And there are Christians who've been forced to leave countries. And I follow, there's a vicar out there called Canon Andrew White, and I follow what he's been saying. And I don't know if any of you have heard of him. This is him. He's a vicar. He's an Anglican vicar, and he's in Iraq. Yeah. And he's amazing because despite everything that's happening, he's still upholding his faith. He's still sort of standing there and just crying out to people. Actually, he's in the UK at the moment. He's come home for a bit. But he's been standing by people, and his heart has been breaking over what's happening to Christians. And the other day he sort of said, I can't actually show you any photographs. I did think about sharing a photograph with you of what I've just seen, but it's too violent. I've just been into a home, and there was a family of 8 people who've all been shot dead, holding their Bibles. Yeah. And this is unusual. Yeah. And he said this the other day. He said, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He said the extent of the persecution here in Iraq cannot be described. Massacres, crucifixions, rapes. It's just the most horrendous massacre of the innocent since the Holocaust. Yet amongst us, we give thanks because ours is the kingdom of heaven. You can't imagine it, can you? What is going on there? They don't even use bullets on children, he says, because bullets are too precious. It's heartbreaking, isn't it, to see all of this that's going on. And I just felt God was sort of saying to me that I needed you all to understand what's going on, what's happening to my people, so you can pray for them and you can hold them up and hold them close to God, because what's ever happening to them is the worst ever thing. So, how does this relate to our 2 readings? Well, in the readings, we have the opposite of conflict, don't we? In the reading from Genesis, we picked up the story of Joseph. Joseph and his brothers. Joseph had been living with his brothers. His brothers were jealous, and they'd sold him into slavery. And Joseph had a dream where he actually God had given him a message saying that there was going to be a famine. And he gave this message to the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh actually put him in charge of the storerooms, so they were able to store up food. And Joseph's brothers didn't know this. They thought he was dead. And they came to Egypt. And even though they met Joseph in Egypt, they didn't know it was him, because they couldn't believe that Joseph was like that. And at the time of the reading was the time when Joseph actually sort of revealed himself to them. And he could have let them go on their way. He said, oh, these are my brothers and they're awful to me, and just sent them away. But actually, he and his brothers were reconciled. They put aside their differences, even after everything that had happened. And then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. Benjamin embraced him, weeping, and he kissed all of his brothers and wept over them. And afterwards his brothers talked with him. That's reconciliation. And not only that, but he shared his wealth with them. And he offered them and their families a safe place to stay in Egypt. They were able to put aside their differences and to be reconciled. In the second reading, Jesus meets a Canaanite woman. And even though she's not a Jew, she's a Gentile, she begs Jesus to heal her daughter. And Jesus has this conversation with her. He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat crumbs that fall from under their master's table." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment. Now, to me, this is very interesting because Jesus is actually sort of revealing that he'd come for the Jews, but actually he was prepared to meet this woman who wasn't a Jew and actually meet her needs. And this isn't the only time he does, because there's lots of times when Jesus meets people who are Gentiles and actually meets with them. And last month when I preached, I actually talked about the vision that Peter had. I don't know if you remember, but Peter had a vision telling him that Christ died not just for the Jews, but Christ died for everyone. It's a message of peace. It's a message of reconciliation. It's a message of love. Christ died for everyone, not just the Jews. And Paul has this to say: this righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There's no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came through Christ Jesus. Isn't that good news? Because it's a message of love, and it means that we are able to be Christians because we don't come from a Jewish faith. We have to remember, though, that Christ loves everyone, even our worst enemies, even the people who are persecuting. Christ came for them. Jesus on the cross said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing." This is what he said to the people who persecuted him. And this is the prayer that we need to ask of God, even though we can see the terrible things that are happening to our brothers and sisters in Christ across the world. We need to be able to pray this prayer. We need to pray for peace and reconciliation. We need to listen to God and obey what he's saying to us. We need to love our enemies. A difficult one to do, I know. And we need to forgive, because Jesus died for everyone, not just for the people who are Christians. And Kerry's going to come up and lead us in a time of prayer in a minute. So she can do that.